See, we're learning. We're learning as we're going, eh? We're learning as we're going. Sanuk, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And I know you came from Uluwatu. How was the drive? How was that?
It was a long drive, but thankfully I was in the backseat taking calls, so it was not bad at all. It's nice being out here, man. The vibe and the energy is totally different out in Jambu. I was just having a conversation with someone about this. It's just much more hustle and drive here. It's inspiring. So it's awesome being here.
What made you choose Uluwatu in the first place?
I chose Uluwatu because I like surfing, and I was like, this is fantastic. You know, it's a rare opportunity to live in a part of the world with some of the best waves. And so the idea was surf and work, and I had this ideal setup, and I started surfing more and working less, and I was like, okay, I need to find more work in my work-life balance setup right now. So
very cool, very cool. So we'll spend the next 40 minutes or so talking about you and obviously the theme of the event, which is keeping the company afloat and having it thrive during a COVID period. But let's begin at the beginning with your childhood. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born. I do believe you speak Indonesian. So how's that? Why is that? And tell us a little bit about the way you were raised and your family and your childhood background.
Sure. I was born in Delhi. I was born in India. I left when I was 3 years old, and my father was working for this multinational company, so he's relocated to Indonesia, and we moved to Jakarta. And I spent, I would say, probably the first, 8 from the ages of 3 to 8, I spent in Jakarta. And then we moved to South Africa. I spent a few years in South Africa. Came back to Jakarta, completed my high school, went to Australia for university. Came back to Jakarta again, and I just wanted to work here. And so that was, my childhood. I had a lot of trips where we would leave for a few years and then keep coming back. And to me, there was always something very special about Indonesia. Even as a kid, you could feel that this country had so much to offer, not only from just a cultural, historical, even just religious context, but even, I think, economically. Like, you could see the progress and you could see the growth of the country during that time. And so even graduating and kind of leaving Australia, my parents being Indian parents, or if anyone has Asian parents who resonate, for a lot of Asians, unfortunately, like, making it means getting a passport from another country. So going to school in Australia, my parents was like, all right, you're one step closer to making it, you can become an Australian now. And I was like, no, I want to go back to Indonesia, because I think that there's so much opportunity, there's so much potential here. And that was, I guess, my childhood was very nomadic, a lot of moving, a lot of, being thrown into new cultures, new environments, and just having to adapt.
It's interesting because you went through all of that, and yet you found kind of home in Indonesia, and you always wanted to come back. Although you've seen all these different places, ultimately you decided to come back to Indonesia.
For sure. I think there's also something that I believe, which is your calling, and logically it may not make sense, and it can be very hard to rationalize why a certain decision is a decision you want to make. But there's a part of you that intuitively is pushing you or pulling you in a certain direction. And now looking back at it, all the decisions I made sense, but at that time, they really weren't logical.
Okay. And so, early childhood, I think we touched upon. What did you study in Australia? What did you study in uni?
Yeah, that was a difficult time for me, because my father was pushing me into finance, and I knew that I was never very excited by math, finance, numbers. I've always been a storyteller growing up, and I always loved subjects like English and psychology and economics, even to a big degree, in school, because you could wing it. You could not do much studying and just use your creative and BS skills to physically just wing it. And so I realized that I'm actually very good at winging it. I'm very good at storytelling. And you can't wing it with numbers, right? With numbers, there's some creativity involved, but there's just a very limited bandwidth for creativity. So I ended up doing a double major in finance and marketing. So I placated my father, and I also, doubled down on, I think, the talent that I had to use. Telling stories.
I think we're seeing that right now. Before we dive into Caliber, tell us a little bit about the previous ventures that you had. So after uni, your double diploma, finance marketing, what was the first job that you got? Was it already a startup? Like, did you go with the startup mindset right out of uni, or is that something that came later? Tell us a little bit about your entry in the professional world.
So my entry in the professional world was when I was 18 years old and when I was in university. And it was actually also my first foray technically as an entrepreneur. Being in university, I didn't frankly enjoy studying all that much. The great thing about Australia at that time was lectures were optional. Classes were mandatory, and I only had around 3 to 4 hours of mandatory classes, and everything that was optional I did attend. Because I didn't feel like I was learning much, or I wasn't learning in a format that engaged me. But I wanted to work, and I wanted to learn, and I wanted to learn how to make money. So the only job I could get at the time was, I saw this ad, I still remember, this is like back in 2007, 2008, so it was some online classified site. There was a direct marketing ad for Optus, which is one of the big telcos in Australia. And it said, 0 experience required, walk-in interview at this time, this date. I'm like, great, 0 experience, hopefully I should qualify. Walk in, it's a nice office, everyone's dressed real smart in suits. I'm like, this looks really cool. So as an 18-year-old, this is exactly the kind of environment you want to be in. And sit down, very quick chat. They're like, all right, we're gonna do a field test. Take 5 of us, mostly all university students in Melbourne. Get into a car, drive to some neighborhood, and we get out of the car, and the team lead, so-called, who's running this interview, he walks up to a door, knocks on the door, and then starts selling this product. This home phone and broadband and internet, right? So it's a door-to-door sales job, labeled as direct marketing, being the marketers that they are. And I immediately remember there's like 2-3 other people in the group that are like, all right, this is not for me, I'm out. And they laugh at me, right? They're just like, hey, I'm going back. I'm not doing door-to-door sales. And I saw him do it, and I thought, that doesn't look that hard. And I asked him, how much do you make? And he told me how much he makes, or how much he could make on an average day. It's like, sign me up, I'm in. And so I did that for 3 months, and that was my first job. It was door-to-door sales, and it was a really remarkable experience. And yeah,
I'm sure it taught you so much, but how did your father feel about that?
I told him I was in direct marketing. No, actually, he was impressed because it showed him that I was willing to work for money. And at 18, what did I want the money for? I wanted the money so that I could have a better lifestyle than what my kind of pocket money was providing me. So I could go out, party, and just enjoy life more. And I think the motivation behind it has evolved with time, but yeah, that desire to want to learn how to make money has always been there with me.
Awesome. So it's been really startup mindset from the get-go, right?
Yeah, and I never even framed it as startup mindset. It's always been about putting myself out of my comfort zone, learning new things, using what I'm good at initially it was about making money, and that's evolved now. It's about doing much, much more.
Excellent. Tell us a little bit about one of the previous ventures that you had before Caliber. Before we talk about Caliber, we talked about the microfinancing firm that you built. Can you tell us a little bit about that? When was it? How did you draw upon previous experiences to do that? Tell us the 2-cent story about the microfinancing platform.
Sure. So before Caliber, I built a microfinance venture. It's called Masha. And started that in 2013 with one of my childhood friends from Jakarta as well. His family, they've been in the agriculture industry for quite some time in Indonesia. And so one of the things that he observed, and we kind of spent a lot of time researching, was understanding why Indonesia, which was historically an agrarian nation, historically Indonesia was a net exporter of a lot of agricultural commodities, all of a sudden was a net importer, right? We're importing, at that time at least, $300 million worth of corn, $450 million worth of soybean, so rice, salt. Indonesia has been a net importer of salt. And so when you kind of dive deeper into the problem, you then realize like, okay, not only are we net importer, but we have 18 million smallholder farmers that live below the global poverty line. And then you begin to spend more time diving into the problem, and you see that it's all interconnected. It's like 18 million smallholder farmers living below the poverty line, and the average farm size in Asia is like less than half a hectare, which is tiny. And that's going to feed 4 or 5 people. So we kind of really zeroed in on the problem, and then we looked at historical approaches to trying to solve this problem that failed. And what we eventually created was this end-to-end solution where we learned that just providing loans is simply not enough, because it's really about providing loans, high quality farming inputs, training, market access. So once they've raised the crop, helping them sell it. And so that was the business that we built over a 3-4 year period. It got acquired by a large agri company, and that was sort of my segue into Caliber.
So when was that segue, just so that we have a time reference? When was that?
2016.
2016. So now Caliber is 7 years.
Yes. So I joined Caliber at the start of 2016. Caliber actually started in 2013. And Caliber started in 2013 by my co-founders in San Francisco. And it started as a assessments company. And so for the first 3 years of Caliber's life, they were largely an assessments company, trying to solve the problem of helping organizations assess talents to basically find the right hire, and helping them run technical, cognitive, behavioral assessments. That business model didn't work, so they joined Y Combinator. They were the first Southeast Asian startups at that time to enter and join Y Combinator, which is a prestigious incubator firm. Raised some capital, pivoted the model multiple times, failed, and the last attempt was our job portal model, which is when I came in. And I was brought in as a partner to, one, help scale the job portal business model, and then secondly is also to help build out our Indonesia business.
And so, again, before we deep dive into Caliber, I feel like there's a link throughout your experience and in your startups with environmental and social causes. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a very strong set of values that you have. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, do you know where it came from? Do you think it was linked to you traveling when you were a child? Is this something you've always been passionate about? Was there a day when you said, this is what I want to do, I want to help other people? Tell us a little bit more about that relationship you have to environmental and social.
Great question. It came from my university experiences where, as I mentioned earlier, my original focus was always making money. And from within the first 2 years of my being at university, I learned I'm really good at making money. And through that money, my focus was material things. And so, through my own work, and this is not funded by parents or anything at all, it was a very meager budget from them, I was able to have a fantastic lifestyle. But what I realized in my final year of university was, while I had this fantastic lifestyle and I had most things that any 20-year-old guy could want, I was actually deeply unhappy. And the more I got, the more I just kept wanting, the more I kept searching. And I would have a list. I'd start each year with a list of the things that I would want, and I would end the year with everything there. And the list kept growing, the list kept changing, and eventually it took a car accident while I was at university, almost near fatal car accident, where as soon as that accident happened, literally the crash happens, and in that moment, I have this realization that whatever I'm doing is not working, because yes, I'm making money, but I'm not feeling fulfilled and I'm not feeling happy. So I need to look for a different path. And that's where my world kind of opened up towards spirituality. So literally overnight, my friends thought I was crazy. Stop drinking, stop partying, stop going out, stop almost everything. And I just started diving into the world of spirituality, reading authors like Eckhart Tolle and books on Hinduism, and Christianity, and Islam, and Buddhism, and learning from different practices just to understand, okay, I've understood what one side of the spectrum of life has to offer, which is material and all those wonderful things, but what does the other side of the spectrum have to offer when it comes to learning how to be self-contented, self-fulfilled, and living, I think, more harmoniously with the world, with the earth. And that inspired me me to go on a backpacking trip across India. I spent 6 months backpacking, and that's where I just learned more about poverty, the way that most of the world lives. I learned about the lack of choices that most people have, and just the fact that you have a choice, how much that is really a gift and privilege. And from that point on, I was never interested in just making money, and I was never interested in just working for some big organization whose sole interest was making money. But it was always then about, okay, what's the bigger purpose, what's the bigger picture?
Wow, it's hard to follow up with the insightful thoughts after such a poignant story. I didn't know. Just sharing. Let's deep dive into Caliber now. So after the microfinancing startup, which was not your only venture prior to Caliber, but I think it's the one that we wanted to highlight because of this environmental and social impacts, you joined Caliber 7 years ago. For those who don't know Caliber yet, let's start at the very beginning. What does it do? What is Caliber?
Sure. Caliber, we are I don't like the word jobs platform, we're a career discovery platform where we connect talents from the Philippines and Indonesia with opportunities from the Philippines and Indonesia and since the pandemic globally. Today our biggest market is the US, and we're largely helping American and European and Israeli companies build remote teams in this part of the world.
And so did it start in the Philippines or in Indonesia?
Started in the Philippines in 2015, and Indonesia we launched like literally a few months shortly after.
And so from 2013 to 2015, what was happening in the Philippines? Because you said it was created in 2013, right?
Correct.
So they were ideating, pivoting?
They were focusing on assessments. So a major industry in the Philippines is the BPO, or the business process outsourcing industry, where Philippines is known as one of the call centers in the world. Typically, if you're getting customer service help, you're likely talking to someone from the Philippines or India. And what these business process outsourcing companies need is like very high volume of talents, but they just struggle in assessing. So Caliber, my co-founder, started it by focusing on assessments and kind of trying to build technology to help companies assess talents. And that business model didn't work. They were finding it hard to monetize. And the feedback that they kept getting from the clients was, sure, assessments are great, but we need talents. Like, we're just not getting enough applications. And so that's where the pivot happened into the jobs portal and recruitment talent space.
And so Philippines and Indonesia mostly, is there a reason behind that? Because it could have been Philippines and Malaysia, or Philippines and Malaysia and Indonesia. What made it that the focus is mainly those two countries?
So started the Philippines because my co-founders, they're American with Filipino descent, and they were born in America, they were raised in America. Again, similar mentality where when they told their parents that, hey, I'm leaving California and I'm going back to the Philippines, which is where their parents had left, and it was a very arduous journey. And I'm going back to the Philippines to work and to build a life and to try to create something that could help people. They're like, you're crazy. So for them, this was part of their journey in giving back and trying to use the knowledge and experiences they had to kind of help their people. And that's how Philippines started, and then Indonesia was, I think, just the next obvious step, just based on the size of the population. Similar demographics, where when you look at it from an income inequality, use disparity, massive archipelago as well. So there was just a lot of similarities in the market, so it made sense to do Indonesia next. We were launching Vietnam, and then the pandemic happened, so that kind of froze everything, and during the pandemic we pivoted into remote work.
That was going to be my next question, because it's great that you're opening up shop in the US, and we'll talk more about that. But the next logical step would seem to go to more countries in Southeast Asia,
correct,
and then go much further, right?
Correct. So the idea we always had was, we called it the golden triangle of talent, which was Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, especially for tech talent, which is some of the most sought after globally. And then the world changed.
So how was that? Because as I mentioned in the beginning, we really hope that this event and this you sharing your story can give a lot of practical advice to people. And as per the theme of the evening, how do you do it? Can you give us the 3 bullet points, the 3 must-dos in order to get 6 million users and become profitable within 2 years?
This may sound obvious, but I think the first one and this is echoed by a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of friends that have built far bigger companies than I have. Some of them probably apps in your phone that you have. And one thing that we all echo is staying alive. So, sounds obvious, but you've got to do everything that you can to make sure that your business stays alive. And my friend, who's the founder of a massive unicorn company, his understanding is 10 years. If you can stay alive for 10 years as a business, you are likely going to hit some form of pivotal moment, pivotal point where things will begin to really accelerate. And I think there's truth to that. Obviously, now you want to make sure that the business you are keeping alive, it is growing, it is delivering value, you are differentiated, so there are certain guidelines and rules that need to apply. But just staying alive and believing in what you're doing, I think that is definitely rule number one. And there were so many times when we were near death, dead, and resurrected or resuscitated as a company, that it really was just a matter of that moment of us as like a team or us as co-founders saying, okay, let's do this one more, let's give this one more shot, let's put in a little bit more money, let's raise a little bit more, let's do whatever we can and just give it another push. And normally at that point it doesn't even become about money. Often at that point it just becomes about like just emotion, right? Because 10 years is a long time, even for us at that point. Like 3 years, 4 years of constantly just hitting hitting so many walls and sitting down, and you're seeing numbers and there's growth and there's positive responses and there's traction, but you're still struggling with very existential problems, which by the way, massive companies struggle with existential problems. And you're just like, do we have it in us to keep going? And so I think the first one is staying alive, and the second one is making sure you're solving a problem that you care deeply enough about, because when you inevitably hit those existential problems and those walls, you can summon the emotional motivation and just push to keep going. A lot of times, I think entrepreneurs can start businesses, or not even entrepreneurs, even just as an employer, as a professional. You can join a company that could be good and could tick many boxes for you, but it may not take. This is I believe life-changing work that I'm doing, or this is I believe a role that I'm playing where I'm fulfilling a purpose of mine. And if that box is not being ticked, whether it's as an entrepreneur or as a professional, when shit hits the fan, it's really, really, really hard to stay strapped in. Startups are everyone hopes it's a rocket ship, in reality it's a roller coaster, right? And your straps are whatever purpose and fulfillment and sense of, I would say, mission you can derive from what you're doing. Those are your straps. And without those, then comes down, you're going for a loop, you're likely just going to get thrown off because you're not buckled in.
Do what you love and love what you do?
Totally.
I think we talked about also it's a culture, and I feel like that's kind of an extension of you loving what you're doing, because you gotta share that passion and that emotion with the rest of your team.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about how culture played a role in navigating COVID and achieving much more than just surviving? How does culture factor in?
Culture has been massive for us, because in all those times where we had a very real existential crises, and there were moments where we're like, we're not sure if this is working, we're not sure if we can keep doing this, we're not sure if we're going to survive. One thing that I learned from my co-founder, who, again, great to have diversity on the team, and diversity of mindsets and diversity of cultures, because we learn from each other. And one thing that I learned from him, who was brought up in the Valley, in the Bay Area, which has like a very Californian, open-minded, transparent way of operating, was there was just 100% brutal honesty every single time with the whole company. And so when things were good, everyone knew what was good and what was happening. When things were bad, everyone knew, like, guys, we've got 3 days of runway left, and this is what we need to do as a team to stay together. And so culture, and especially more specifically, creating a culture of absolute transparency and honesty and vulnerability, which is really hard as a leader, right? Because if you're barreling towards your death, inevitably it means you as a leader failed in some part, and so it's hard to admit that to your company, and it's hard to admit to your company that in 3 days I might not be able to pay everyone's salaries. That's a very hard thing to admit, and you'd rather try to shield people from it, but time and time again I've learned that when you can try to build a culture, especially built around those pillars, it just really becomes transformative. And one thing that has always been a takeaway from mine is culture is the reason why everyone stays when they have every reason to leave. And so, when you're at the bottom of the bottom as an organization, the culture you build and the relationships people have with each other and the connection they feel, not only with the mission and the work that they're doing, but also with you as a leader, whether it's as a professional or as an executive or as a founder, that then becomes that catalyst where they feel like what they have is special, right? Because just like everything else, if you want to stand out, you've got to be different. Most companies, 90%, 95, 98% of the companies don't operate with this like crazy level of authenticity and honesty and transparency, right? That's not their culture. And so if you can create an experience, a cultural experience within an organization that's so radically different and refreshing, makes people feel like this is special, and it is special, because you're like the 2% or the 1% of organizations or leaders that do it. So yeah, culture has been a key pillar for us. Yeah.
One of my favorite documentaries is The Greatest Movie Ever Sold by Morgan Spurlock, which is a movie about marketing and advertising, financed by marketing and advertising. And he goes out and he seeks brands that are extremely playful and truthful, and he ends up getting a large number of no's from big guys, but then some companies join, and then the documentary / movie is just one of my favorite ones, just mind-blowing, because you really see when a company has this kind of open-mindedness and those values, and it really stands out from the rest, right?
Totally.
So segueing from this culture topic, tell us a little bit about, first, give us some numbers. Like pre-COVID, how many employees did you have globally? What happened during COVID, and now where are you at? Just so that we have like also data points to refer to.
Sure. Pre-COVID, we had more than 150 employees. During COVID, we scaled down to 30 employees. Today, we have 80 employees and growing, which I'm still like. Having gone down to 30, which is extremely hard, is also just crazily eye-opening because we went down to 30 to survive. It wasn't, us being very strategic about it. No, we went down to 30 to survive and stay alive as a company. But when we went down to 30, we realized that actually we can survive and we can stay alive as a company. And even without, as a marketplace, as a platform, you have millions of users. There's so many different things that need to happen on the technology side. And it became a real concern, like, is it even just humanly possible to operate a platform that's already at this scale with such few people? But again, it came down to the team really banding together and rallying to not figure out if it can happen, but how it can happen. And so we knew that the number we have to have in terms of headcount and everyone, leaders and everyone, we all took salary cuts, and we all did everything we could. And so we knew that this is the number that we needed to hit in terms of our costs. So it's like, okay, not can we, but how is it possible for us to operate with this, operating structure or cost structure and still be able to not diminish the user experience for our clients or our end users.
And so going through that difficult period actually enabled you to focus on what was really important, as you said, like staying alive and culture and looking at the key indicators. And in that sense, you kind of trim, and it enabled you to be much more performant.
Exactly. The pandemic for us was simultaneously one of the hardest moments, if not the hardest moment in our company's history, but then also the most transformative moment. because it transformed us from being a venture-backed organization to being a profitable, self-sufficient organization. It transformed us from being a growth at all costs oriented organization to a sustainable growth organization. It transformed us from being a regional organization where we're just looking at Philippines and Indonesia to a global organization because it opened up remote work. And companies in the US and Europe and Australia realized, hey, we don't need to pay these crazy salaries when there are exceptional talents, across the world that are also available to work remotely. And so from that, a major way of thinking that we have introduced into our company is now anytime something bad happens, whether it's in a division or whether it's across the company as a whole, and especially when something bad happens, it usually feels like it's the worst thing that could ever happen to you, right? Sometimes you get those moments where you're like, wow, this is happening, and you get this anxiety attack, or this is the worst thing. And the moment, whether it's an individual or a team, because it could be a divisional, or it's us as a whole company, the moment we feel that feeling now, we try to remind ourselves, okay, if this is the worst thing that's happening to us, we've had the worst thing happen to us before it turned out to be the best thing, right? So if this is the worst thing that's happening to us, how can we make this situation and turn this situation into the best fucking thing that could have ever happened to us? So that's now kind of become our mindset and philosophy, and it's really empowering.
That takes a lot of discipline and willpower. And you mentioned spirituality before. Is that something that you still carry on a lot that helps you in those situations?
Meditating daily or trying to meditate daily definitely helps because it just creates a bit more space between the inevitable emotions that you're going to face. I think just as a human being trying to live life. All of you are in this room tonight, which tells me immediately that all of you are ambitious human beings. So as an ambitious human being trying to live life, right? You're trying to go above and beyond. You're trying to stand out from what everyone else is doing and be different in your own way or try to create something that doesn't exist. And so the moment you're trying to do that, that is not the easy path, right? That is a path of resistance, and it's going to create emotions, and it's going to be hard. So spirituality, meditation, finding some way to manage that is very helpful. I also very publicly talk about the fact that I do therapy. Most of my entrepreneur friends that have built very valuable companies are also all in therapy. I think that it needs to just be more normalized within the community that having a objective third person kind of guiding you through not only how you're feeling and how you're reacting, but also guiding you through how the people around you may be feeling and understanding how they're reacting, I think is just a game changer. So, yeah.
I'm surprised we didn't talk about that yet because I also openly praise it. I think it's one of the best things that people can do. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the product. So we tackled you going through this period and trimming and then getting out of it stronger. We talked about it from the human point of view, the culture point of view. How does that relate to the product? Is it this very similar kind of mindset that you applied to the product, or was it different? How did the product evolve pre-COVID, during COVID, and where is it now?
Sure. So the mission for Caliber, even when it started in 2013 to until today, it's all about helping people find meaningful work. And it's especially about helping people that come from difficult or challenging circumstances. So countries like Indonesia and Philippines, large archipelagos, for both countries, most of the top 10 universities are all in kind of one geographical area, right? In Indonesia, most of the top 10 universities are all in this main island of Java. So what that means is if you just happen to be born in Sulawesi or Sumatra or Kalimantan or Papua, one of the other major islands, if not including the millions of others that are there, and your parents simply did not have the financial resources to pay for you to attend one of the top 10 universities, which are all geographically located quite far away, for no fault of your own, you could be the most intelligent, the most talented, the most hardworking individual. Just by virtue of where you were born, you were already excluded from the top 10 universities, and the top companies historically have all hired from the top 10 universities, and so you're excluded from the top companies, and because you cannot move, you're limited to the job opportunities within your part of the world and kind of where you're living, where you're working, regardless of your talent. With Caliber, I think a big part of our platform and how we built off our assessments engine was we made assessments included and free for every one of our users to take. They're not crazy complex assessments. We have technical assessments, behavioral assessments, cognitive assessments. We work with the Asian Development Bank. They actually gave us a grant to help flesh these assessments out. So we work with subject matter experts. And the whole point of these assessments were that when candidates are applying to jobs, fine, they may not have one of the top 10 universities, or they may not have one of the top companies on their resume, but by virtue of these assessments, they can showcase their skills and they can open up to new opportunities. So, our product started there. And to your question about how we've evolved, well, now that same assessments engine that was helped to enable, candidates from, remote rural parts of Indonesia and the Philippines connect with top opportunities in the metro areas. Now that same engine is powering those candidates connecting with top opportunities all around the world. And that's where now it's really game changing, where I'll often have conversations with people and, they'll say this has been a life-changing moment for me because now I don't have to leave my hometown. I'm in a small village, or I'm in a small city in this remote part of Indonesia and the Philippines, and I'm doing work that I love. I'm earning 50% more than I would if I was working for a local company. And I'm working for this awesome American startup or European startup or Australian tech company, and I'm learning new skills and I'm working with a different culture and I'm growing, and I still have my family in the community here. So that is exactly for us the kind of future that we've always envisioned, and what motivates us to the work that we do.
So it sounds to me like the product didn't change drastically at all. It just got a huge new geography to tackle.
Yeah, the product didn't change. The world changed. And that's why, back to my earlier point about staying alive, stay alive, because you don't know how the world will change and the winds may change in your favor. And that's, and that's where it also goes back to what I mentioned earlier about intuition. Right? You've got to trust your heart, you've got to trust your gut. Right? Sometimes you've got to know when to fold it in, right? You've got a bad hand, and entrepreneurship is all about things working, not working. And you've got to know when to fold, but also, doesn't matter what your hand looks like, if there's something within you to say, keep going, and you never know how the world may change in your favor.
We also talked a little bit about some of the challenges that you've had throughout this period, because I'm sure you had some. It can't, everything can't be perfect. And we specifically talked about user behavior or changing behavior, whether it's from the user or private partners or public partners. Can you also tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, a big challenge for us.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. A big challenge for us starting was that, conceptually sounds wonderful, right? Use assessments, help people showcase their skills, and companies should be hiring talents based on their skills and not simply based on where they studied and where they worked. Sure. But the reality is that companies have been hiring based on where they studied and where they worked for decades, forever. So changing that user behavior takes time, it takes education, it takes investment. And so that was always a big hurdle for us, was getting, clients to use our assessments, getting clients to look at candidates that didn't fall or fit their traditional hiring requirements. That became a big challenge. Another big challenge was paying for talent. So monetizing. We knew we had a great product, and job seekers loved it. Companies and clients that would use it, they would love it. But for many other companies, they just also struggled with this idea that, why should I pay more for a platform that has additional functionality when, in a country like Indonesia or Philippines, you have so many applicants, especially these big companies are getting so many applicants that I don't necessarily need it. So financially, we also really had to figure out our monetization strategy and really figure out who do we sell to and how do we make them value what we're trying to create. And starting a business is hard. Starting a business with a social edge or an impact edge, and your focus as an entrepreneur or professional is not just making money, but also trying to like create some change or some good, that's even harder. And I know there's a lot of you out here that are doing socially driven ventures and you know involved in socially driven projects, and it's really hard. And so you just got to keep powering through.
You just got to keep powering through. You take that one, and I'll shout.
Sure. Okay.
And so before we get on to quick fire questions and Q&A from the audience, I want to touch on fundraising. So tell us, I think it's fine. It's fine. Thank you. Is everybody okay if I speak like this?
Yeah.
Thank you. Tell us about fundraising. How many rounds did you have? Can you give us roughly like what round you did? And then we're going to relate that to navigating COVID in that period.
Sure. So we've done a bunch of rounds, and I honestly would not even be able to like historically remember each one. Almost every year we raised a round, basically, since inception. And the sizes of the rounds vary, right? So it started with angel rounds, and then we got into Y Combinator, so it was an incubator round, and then we did a pre-seed round, and we did a seed round, and then post-seed round, and so we raised in total $8 million before the pandemic. We were raising an additional $10 million when the pandemic happened. In fact, we already had term sheets signed. Our lead investors were Line, messaging platform. They were going big into this jobs space, so they were a big strategic investor for us. So Mariah Neighbor, this multi-billion-dollar private equity fund. So we had a big round lined up and term sheet signed, everything ready to go. We're literally counting days before the money was wired into our accounts. Pandemic happens. Worst fucking time to be a recruitment company when everyone's like laying people off and letting people go and the world is shutting down. And so even after everything being signed, investors froze their investments. And so that's where we went from being days that like already planning this massive celebration and media and PR and announcing the round and all the wonderful things we were going to do with the money to very quickly just having to figure out how do we survive and scrambling. And so it was 8 million basically raised over 7-8 year period. And we raised from two types of investors: impact investors. So we raised from a couple of big impact investors like Omidyar Ventures, Learn Capital, Panama Capital, and we also raised from non-impact investors. And I generally found that, honestly, they're both the same. I think the bigger lesson I would say, rather than when it comes to fundraising, rather than optimizing for whether they're impact or non-impact, I would say better to optimize for whether they understand your industry and your space or not. Because the impact is just the type of the mission and the purpose behind the business, but naturally your business is going to fall into either like real estate or F&B or retail. You know, it's going to fall into one of these categories. So you're better off finding an investor that may not be impact oriented, but knows your industry and understands your business, because they can probably add more value.
And so you said you were on track to raise 10 million before COVID.
Correct.
And so did that go down to zero, or did you scale down, or how did that evolve?
Yeah, it went to zero. It went to zero because we were closing the round March 2020. And that's exactly when the world started locking down, countries started locking down, companies started laying off crazily. We started getting cancellations on orders from our clients, and so not only did our fundraising dry up, but then our revenues really began to dry up as well. And that's where our anchor clients really were really helpful. And so I think another big lesson from fundraising is don't, as much as possible, avoid putting yourself in a position where you're fundraising because if you don't fundraise, you'll die. And try to put yourself in a position where you're fundraising because fundraising will enable you to achieve your goals faster, or just more, just more aggressively. Yeah, that was a big lesson for us. Also, a big thing that we've learned after being profitable is we just are constantly being hit up by investors now, and we're not fundraising. And it's kind of like that hot girl thing, right, or hot guy thing, where if, you know, when you're not, or not even hot girl, hot guy, but like married guy taking girl or whatever. When you're not looking, that's when, you know, everything comes to you. And one thing we always share with like fellow entrepreneurs we talk to is, I've never heard of an investor turning down a company because they were too profitable. You know, so if you're too profitable, it's a good problem to have. And try and move towards having that problem versus the problem of growing too fast, burning too much money, and if I don't raise, I'm going to die. Which is how I think most startups tend to operate. It's just changing today now, by the way.
And so one of the first things you told us tonight was that, you know, after uni, you had this door-to-door salesman stint for 3 months, and you realized you were very good at making money, finding money, and storytelling. So in the fundraising process, did you enjoy that? Did you have a big hand in that? Did you manage the discussion with the investors? How was that? Like, how was your involvement?
Great question. And this is where I learned that, you know, as much as we hate to admit it, sometimes our parents are always right. And so, you know, those 3 years I spent learning finance came into massive play with fundraising, because I was able to really look at our numbers and understand our numbers in a way that helped me, with the proximity that I had to the business, tell our story financially, so that the investors could appreciate it. So yes, 100% I was involved with fundraising, I was involved in crafting our narrative, and I was involved in corroborating our narrative through the numbers. When you're starting out, especially as a startup, your numbers matters less, obviously, right? You're just beginning, so at that point it's more about, like, what's your TAM, what's your market opportunity, how big could this be? You know, what makes you different? What's your vision, right? So it's very much more about storytelling. But then year after year, right, there's only so many stories you can tell, and at some point your numbers need to start making sense. And especially at our stage, which is Series B, at that point the numbers need to do all the talking. And so it was very helpful to be able to talk about where we were, where we've come today, where we want to go, and what those numbers basically, and kind of how those numbers support that journey. And one advice that I would have is go granular with your numbers. And by going granular, what I mean is, okay, so investors will always push back on you. That's their job. They're pushing back, one, because they may genuinely not understand, or they may not appreciate what you're doing, like or the complexity of what you're doing, and they'd be like, oh, this seems easy. How come you're only doing this much revenue, or how come you're only doing this much of this, right? Or this much production, or whatever it may be. So investors will likely push back on you there. And so it's very important to do granular numbers, and by granular I mean know what industry standards are, know what industry benchmarks are. So for us, what we did was we looked at industry benchmarks for software as a service companies, or jobs portals of our size for sales, and we looked at what is the conversion, what is the global industry standard conversion rates from a lead to a qualified lead to a proposal to a deal, right? And so even though maybe our revenues, which are never as high as any investor wants, and we're trying to drive the price down, even though our revenues weren't as high as they wanted, the moment we could show them that actually our funnel is operating at industry standard, and so for every dollar that we're putting into this funnel, we're converting as good, if not better, than some of the best software as a SaaS companies in the world, that was the perfect response that we could give. And doing that across every division of the organization, so that way you say, hey, are we operating at industry standard? Do we have a world-class sales process? Do we have a world-class customer success process? Do we have a world-class marketing process? How efficient are we in being able to turn $1 and making that into $2 or $3? And can we showcase that? And as long as you can showcase that and showcase that you are moving towards that North Star and operating at that standard, then it's just a matter of putting more gasoline into the engine. And that's what fundraising is about, right? It's either going to be when you're earlier, help me build that engine, and at a later stage, I've got this awesome engine. Look at how we compare against the best in the world. We just need more gasoline and we're ready to go.
Sounds to me like you really enjoyed that process.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Patrick, you got a question?
Just really quick one. Where did you get that data from actually? So that's like really deep, like sales, marketing, operations, like this comp data. Where did you find that?
It was slightly easier for us because so our business model is SaaS, software as a service. So there's so many SaaS comparables and SaaS data points and public listed SaaS companies out there that we could get that pretty easily. I think for other industries it may be more tricky. There are research firms out there. I don't know how much they cost. There are research firms out there. I don't know how much they cost. Even if it costs, honestly, even if it costs like a few $100, maybe even like a couple of $1,000, and you are planning on fundraising, make that investment, because you having that data point and being able to reference that and showcase that to investors, man, that is again you standing out as an entrepreneur and as an organization, and you can silence them on those moments.
So I've got just 8 questions left. Quick fire, don't worry. 5 words or less answer, okay? So we're gonna finish with that, and we're gonna open up to Q&A because I already asked a bunch of questions, but I know we've got 1,000 more, and then you're kind enough to stay a little bit afterwards so people can also come up and chat with you, right? So, do you think entrepreneurs are born or made?
I think they're made.
Perfect. If we want more detail, then we come and find you later.
Yeah.
They're made. What's
Wait, this is fire round, right? I should elaborate.
Perfect.
Say one word.
It's called a teaser. What's the best advice you ever got?
Survive.
What's your favorite cafe to work from in Bali?
Drifter. Uluwatu.
Do they have Drifter, Canggu?
They have Drifter in China. They used to, right? No? Seminyak. There you go.
Drifters. What's your hidden talent? Or a hidden talent?
I don't have a hidden talents. I'm an open book. I showcase my talents.
What's your spirit animal?
An elephant.
Maybe ask why?
Sure. I like elephants because they move slowly, but always with purpose. They have phenomenal memories. They're very community oriented, strong social bonding, great memories, just beautiful, beautiful creatures.
We did not rehearse this, I promise. 2 more. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
I would say you're doing great and just believe in yourself more. Cheerlead yourself more. I'll elaborate more on this because I think it's so important for people to hear. I think that we're all, and especially again, a room full of ambitious people, we're all really good at being our own worst critic, right? So we don't need practice there, we don't need help there. I think a big transformational moment for me, especially realizing that I need to scale up as a leader in order to scale up the company. A big pivotal moment was recognizing that if you're willing to be your own biggest critic, you've got to be willing to be your own biggest cheerleader. You've got to be willing to be your own biggest fucking champion. Because if you're just criticizing yourself all the time, right, then you're a cynic, then you're pessimistic, right? You're just beating yourself up. If you're just cheerleading yourself the whole time, then you're delusional, right? So you've got to strike that balance. And for entrepreneurs, leaders, like, you've got to be kinder to yourself. You've got to believe in yourself, cheerlead yourself. Yeah.
Now finally, what do you want people to say about you when you leave the room?
I helped in some way. I added some value, hopefully. Yeah.
I'm sure that's what we'll be saying tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Maddie or Chelsea will, but we only have one microphone anyway. Does anybody have a question that they want to ask? We can do this for 5-10 minutes and then food and drinks, but we'll be chatting anyways. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yes. Hey Sanuk, thanks a lot for the lab lessons tonight. I'm curious, how exactly did COVID impact your users acquisition and retention, and how did you deal with the situation? What were the numbers before and after? Thank you.
Yeah, so before COVID, for user acquisition, I'll talk about the job seekers, because that was it's like we have B2C and B2B. B2Bs, we're working with the companies, helping them find talents, and B2C is the job seekers. With job seekers, we were almost growing around 100,000 new signups per month before COVID. COVID hit, we kind of went down to 10,000 just because there's like no jobs. People that had jobs weren't looking to move. And so that really hurt us in the numbers. And at that point, kind of how did we bounce back, or how did we respond? Again, it was just really about waiting for the world to change, because we knew that at some point things will open up. We believe that things will open up.
You're just trying like preserving the current numbers so they don't drop more.
Correct. In terms of preserving the current numbers, when you're building a marketplace, you're sort of a coordinator of sorts, where there needs to be players that are on the court that are ready to play.
For the transaction to happen.
Exactly. So you're just there to facilitate. I mean, if there's no players on the court, there's not much you can do. So all we did was, we just tried to keep servicing our current users. We spent a bit more on trying to do educational things. So we did a lot of webinars. We did a lot of like online job festivals and online educational programs. That was, I think, pretty helpful. We partnered with Google on this awesome program called Bangkit, just like a data science training program across Indonesia. So we just try to do those things to create value.
Thank you.
Anybody else got a question? Steve.
Thanks for your time, it's really good. A couple of questions is that you say it takes you guys survive for 10 years to basically make it. How do you prevent competitors trying to take your IP, throw a load of money at it, etc., and kind of just bulldoze the way through, take your market share, etc. They've got deeper pockets, etc. Your investors kind of get scared that your business is going to that great because they're just going to mimic you to take you out. And secondly, I've done a bit of BPL, set contact centers up around the world, etc. So the key challenge, I think, is retaining the staff. People move around, etc. You pay like 50% more, which obviously keeps people loyal. People move for a small amount. How do you balance that with your bottom line? That obviously investors are saying you can't afford to pay the staff more, 50% more, etc. And that erodes on your profitability, etc. So just a couple of things really to understand that.
Great questions. So first one was in terms of dealing with competitors. That is a very real thing. One of our biggest competitors, they just raised $50 million. And then 2 months ago, unfortunately announced like they're laying off several hundred people from the organization. So I think that competition is very real, and depending on what industry and what sector you're in, fundraising may have to be the pathway that you choose, right? Like, because if it's a war of just buying market share, you can't compete in that sense. So I think it really does depend on the industry. This does not suffice, doesn't apply for all industries. So that's one. Secondly, if you are an industry that does require massive fundraising and your competitors aren't fundraising, it's a good thing, because there's only so many investors that could get into their round, which means they believe in the sector as a whole. Most investors tend to, there's a lot of social proofing that happens. So they see other investors investing in that sector, and you're another up and comer, and you're competing with that player that's got invested, you'll have fundraising opportunities at your race. That's always a good thing as well. In terms of specifically for the BPO sector, so for us, we're not a traditional BPO. We're basically doing remote work, or we do employer of record or payroll. And the difference is that companies are hiring talents that are working directly for them. And so companies are setting the prices. Companies are setting the salaries. And so this 50% higher income that they're getting, that's not a price that we're setting. surprised at the US company setting or the European company setting, because for them, the average software engineer salary might be $80,000, $90,000 per year, and they're getting someone for $13,000 per year, which is like a fraction of the cost, and it's still much more than what they would get if they were to hire from, or if they were to get hired at a local company. So just
Sure, let's get a couple more.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. So I have two questions. The first is, when did you become profitable? And what is the level that contributed the most to profitability? Is it monetization? Is it the number of companies or partners? And second question, did you get the opportunity to sell Fiverr? And if yes, why you didn't?
good question. So, okay, profitability became profitable at the start of 2021. So we had a couple of capital injections between my co-founders and another partner, and we've sustained since then. And secondly, what was the largest contribution? It was this shift to remote, but more importantly, it was also us realizing that you want to sell into the biggest market that you can. So for the longest time, as I mentioned, right, like a big hurdle we faced was monetization. Convincing Indonesian and Filipino companies that it made sense to invest more for better talents and better kind of platforms that offered you greater functionality. So that just was always this uphill battle. And what we realized was that there are companies in the US and Europe and Australia that value our asset infinitely more. So whatever you're building, whatever you're creating, try find the market in the world or the market in the country, whatever it may be, that values you the most, and figure out how to start selling to them as soon as you freaking can. Because that's going to be a game changer. To your second question about selling, yes, so we did receive some offers at various stages of our journey. And I think for us, we are now looking for the right partner because we've built Caliber over blood, sweat, and tears to a brand and to the stage where it is today. And I mean, everything I've described is, to me, nowhere near as exciting as what we're building right now and what we're creating. And we're going full into remote. We're trying to build the best remote jobs platform that exists. So not only now doing remote companies, but also remote talent from all around the world and using the same engine. So I guess if it's about an acquisition, it's about finding a partner that shares that vision. And yeah, wants us to get there.
Let's do one more because we've got a couple surprises. So,
hi. Yeah, it works. We're some sort of colleagues because I've been working in this industry as well, so building the career marketplace in Europe. And I must say, in the other part of the globe, the general mood in the industry is not great. So a lot of companies are closing, including like agencies, outsourcing, also the marketplaces, especially in tech. And basically, my colleagues in the industry, they all are in the survival mode. They're not very optimistic. And basically, they believe if they can survive next year, like this year and also the next one, they might be this minority who survives and maybe becomes big after. And I would like to hear your call, how's it going here in the other part of the globe, how things are in general in the industry. And in general, the whole presentation was very optimistic, so I'm really happy to hear that business is running. But in general, I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Because as I said, in Europe, people are not very optimistic right now who work in this because companies not hiring, they're cutting budgets, but on the other hand, everything becomes more expensive, so people are raising their rates, both freelancers and also permanent employees. So to do the match is getting as hard as never before. So what do you think about that?
I had this chat with our team, and a philosophy that we try to adopt is optimism and caution are not mutually exclusive. So be optimistic, and I think if you look at our financial if you look at our financial strategy for the year, we're very optimistic. We're making bigger bets this year than we've made in the last 3 years. And so we're very optimistic because we know we have a product that is somewhat recession-proof. In fact, the recession is good for us in many ways because we're now helping companies. This is literally our pitch to VCs and startups around the world. You can decrease your burn rate by up to 70% across several divisions of your organization without compromising on the quality of talent and without compromising on your product roadmap and kind of what you want to achieve. So as a value proposition, that's very compelling. And again, we're fortunate to be in a place or to be in a situation where things are just aligning for us. And that's why we're optimistic and we're bullish. But at the same time, we're also cautious. And so we have caution baked into our financial model where we're constantly looking at orders coming in, revenue, our cash outflow, inflows, because we're tracking to see where the wind is blowing. And I would say, as much as you can, design levers where you can be aggressive. And if things aren't going, or if you're beginning to see signs where things may not be going as you anticipate, you can very quickly pull certain handbrakes and pause things. And so one of the ways to do that would be try avoid fixed costs as much as possible. Be aggressive with variable costs. So leverage consultants, leverage agencies, leverage outsourcing, leverage partnerships, leverage things where you can pull the emergency handbrake and overnight cut costs down 30%. And so kind of that's the strategy that we learned from the pandemic that we're applying to this day.
Thank you so much. We'll pause here for the questions because I got just a couple more things that I want to run you guys through. Just 5 minutes before we break. A round of applause again for Sanuk. Thank you so much for coming.